I've always wondered if boredom could drive someone insane. Now, sitting in my dimly lit apartment with these tapes scattered around me like pieces of a twisted puzzle, I know the answer. It's not the boredom that breaks you, it's what you do to escape it. That day started like any other in my apartment on the quiet side of town. The kind of morning where shadows creep across the walls at a glacial pace, and the hum of my refrigerator becomes the only soundtrack to another wasted weekend. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten on my desk next to a stack of unopened bills. The harsh glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face as I dove deeper into the dark web, searching for something, anything to break the monotony. I'd been exploring these hidden corners of the internet for weeks now, not for anything sinister, just curiosity, that dangerous little itch that makes people climb mountains or explore abandoned buildings. The regular internet had become too predictable, too censored. Every website looked the same, every social media post blending into an endless stream of artificial happiness. But down here, in the digital underground, everything felt raw and real. The forums I found were filled with people trading stories about things they'd found in these darker corners. Most were obviously fake, urban legends repackaged for the cryptocurrency age. But then I found this listing. Mystery box for sale, 0.5 Bitcoin, around $100. The website was bare bones, just black text on a white background, looking like something from the early days of the internet. No flashy graphics, no marketing speak, just a simple description. What you receive is what you need to see. The cursor hovered over the purchase button for what felt like hours. My Bitcoin wallet still had some gains from an investment I'd made years ago and forgotten about. Digital money that didn't feel quite real. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was stupid, that I was about to throw away $100 on what was probably a scam. But there was something about the simplicity of that website, the complete lack of effort to convince me to buy, that made it feel authentic. I clicked. The transaction was instant, just numbers changing in digital ledgers somewhere in the vast expanse of cyberspace. The confirmation page displayed only my P.O. box address and the words 3 to 5 days delivery. No receipt, no tracking number. It felt less like a purchase and more like making a deal with something that didn't quite exist. The box arrived exactly 3 days later, early Saturday morning. The doorbell's chime cut through my hangover like a knife, echoing in my skull. When I opened the door, the delivery guy handed me a plain box. No shipping label, no return address, just smooth, unmarked cardboard. It was lighter than I expected, barely weighing anything at all. My hands trembled slightly as I carried it inside, leaving it on my coffee table while I made fresh coffee, trying to convince myself this was just another impulse purchase I would regret. When I opened it, the disappointment was almost laughable. Videotapes, actual VHS tapes, covered in a layer of dust so fine it looked like gray silk. They were arranged in a perfect line, each labeled with dates in neat, mechanical handwriting. Between them lay a single piece of paper, yellowed with age, bearing one word: Looking Glass. I almost threw the whole thing in the trash right then, but something about those tapes drew me in, like a faint whisper I could almost hear. I remembered my old VCR stuffed in the back of my closet behind boxes of tax returns and old winter clothes. It took 20 minutes to find it, another 10 to hook it up to my TV, the whole time feeling like an archaeologist excavating artifacts from a dead civilization. The first tape was labeled 11th March 9/13. The plastic case made a soft cracking sound as I opened it. The tape itself smelled of dust and ozone, that distinct scent of electronics left unused for too long. It slid into the VCR with a mechanical chunk that took me back to childhood movie nights. Static filled my TV screen, the kind of visual snow that seems to move with purpose if you stare at it too long. Then came the sounds. A car engine idling, the soft crunch of footsteps on pavement, the subtle ambient noise of a quiet morning, and then my doorbell. I jumped up, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel as I approached the door, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. Nothing. No one. Just the empty hallway and the distant sound of traffic floating up from the street below. Back in my living room, I rewound the tape and played it again. The doorbell in the recording was identical to mine. Not just similar, but exactly the same. The same slight electronic whine before the first chime, the same millisecond delay between tones that I'd noticed when I first moved in. A perfect audio fingerprint. I told myself it was a coincidence, just a generic doorbell sound that happened to match mine. The kind of random alignment that people make meaning from when there is none. I ejected the tape, telling myself I'd been scammed, that I'd wasted money on someone's home movies or a failed art project. But as I sat there, staring at the rest of the tapes lined up on my coffee table like soldiers awaiting orders, a nagging thought crept in. The timestamp on that first tape, 9:13. Wasn't that exactly when the box had been delivered? I checked my phone's notification history. The security camera had registered motion at my door at exactly 9:13 a.m. The sun had moved across my apartment, casting long shadows that made the remaining tapes look like black holes punched through reality. I picked up the next one, dated March 16th, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I put the tape down and walked to my kitchen, poured myself a generous glass of whiskey, and tried to laugh it off. But even as the alcohol burned its way down my throat, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just set something in motion, something that couldn't be stopped. The whiskey didn't help. Neither did the 4 that followed it. Because every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were those tapes, waiting patiently in their perfect line, each one a window into something I wasn't sure I wanted to see. A few days slipped by like water through my fingers, the world outside moving in its predictable rhythm, while I remained stuck in a loop of disbelief and denial. The tapes sat forgotten on my coffee table. Life, with its insistent demands, had pulled me back into its mundane orbit, and the strange events of that first tape began to feel more like a half-remembered fever dream. But March 16th arrived with a peculiar sense of weight. It was a Thursday, and the city was draped in a persistent drizzle that blurred the edges of everything like an impressionist painting. I dragged myself through my routine, the motions automatic and devoid of thought. Work was a blur of emails and meetings, the hours ticking away with agonizing slowness. When I finally stepped through my apartment door that evening, the box caught my attention instantly, like a forgotten promise demanding to be remembered. I hesitated, my coat still dripping rainwater onto the floor, as I noticed the tape on top bore today's date, March 16th. The coincidence gave me goosebumps, and I found myself moving toward it almost against my will, the day's exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The tape slid into the VCR with the familiar clunk, and the static filled the screen once more. Leaning back into the worn cushions of my couch, I tried to temper my expectations, reminding myself that the last tape had been nothing more than an eerie coincidence. It started with a dog barking, the sound sharp and insistent. Then, the blaring of a car horn, a discordant wail cutting through the tape's fuzziness. Finally, a woman's voice, raised in alarm, the words indistinct but the emotion clear. The image on the screen remained stubbornly blank, but the sounds painted a vivid picture in my mind. Before I could fully process what I was hearing, the real world echoed the tape's soundtrack. From the street below came the unmistakable bark of a dog, followed by the harsh hunk of a car horn and a woman's shout. My heart raced as I ran to the window, the scene unfolding outside mirroring the tape with uncanny precision. A woman chased after a golden retriever darting into traffic. A blue car swerved, tires screeching on wet pavement, narrowly avoiding the dog. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched the scene play out, exactly as I had heard it moments before. The timestamp on the tape had read 1829. My watch now showed 1831. Stunned, I sank back onto the couch, the enormity of what I'd just witnessed crashing over me like a tidal wave. This was no coincidence. The tape had predicted, or perhaps dictated, the events that had unfolded outside my window. The realization left me cold, a creeping dread settling into my bones. With trembling hands, I ejected the tape and reached for the next one. The date on this one was tomorrow, March 17th, with a timestamp of 1630. The exact time I usually returned home from work. My mind raced, replaying the sounds from the previous tape as I hesitated, the fear that had taken root in my chest growing with each passing second. I inserted the tape, the VCR accepting it with its usual mechanical indifference. The static was almost comforting now, a prelude to the inevitable. The sounds that followed were anything but. A man's scream, raw and filled with terror, cut through the static, followed by a deafening crash that made the walls of my apartment seem to tremble. A car accident. My car accident. The realization hit like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The next day, at precisely 1630, I was destined to be involved in a horrific accident. The tape's prophecy felt immutable, a decree handed down from some dark corner of fate that I had unwittingly tapped into. Morning arrived with a heavy sense of inevitability. I dressed mechanically, my thoughts consumed by the tape's prediction. The drive to work was out of the question. Instead, I opted for the train, reasoning that if I wasn't in a car, the accident couldn't possibly occur. The day dragged on, each tick of the clock a reminder of the approaching hour. By the time my shift ended, my nerves were frayed. I left the office, my steps quickening as I approached the train station, the crowded platform a temporary sanctuary from the fear that stalked me. The train ride was uneventful, the rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the chaos in my mind. As the train neared my stop, I felt a momentary flicker of relief. Perhaps the tapes were wrong after all, but fate had other plans. Exiting the station, I passed by a construction site. Workers moved about with practiced efficiency, the site bustling with activity. And then, without warning, a scream split the air, freezing me in place. I turned just in time to see a construction worker lose his footing, his body a blur of yellow as he plummeted from a crane. The machine, suddenly unbalanced, groaned ominously before collapsing in a cacophony of twisting metal and shattering concrete. The ground trembled from the impact, and dust rose into the air like a ghost appearing at sunset. I checked my watch. It was 1630. The tape's prophecy had been fulfilled, not by my actions but by the inescapable march of fate. The accident had occurred, just not in the way I'd feared. A cold certainty settled over me, the realization that the tape's predictions were not warnings to be cautious of, but events set in stone, unchangeable and absolute. As I made my way home, the weight of this knowledge pressed down on me. The remaining tapes awaited me, silent sentinels of a future I could neither change nor escape. When I entered my apartment, the shadows in the corners felt alive, as if they were whispering secrets, telling me to watch and listen for what was coming. But I hesitated, knowing the tapes held no comfort and couldn't change what they predicted. I left the box untouched that night, not ready to face its mystery. Sleep came sporadically, haunted by dreams of static and shadows, of screams and crashes echoing through the corridors of my mind. And as the night stretched on, I realized that tapes weren't just a harmless curiosity or a simple look into the future. They were a mirror reflecting the inevitability of fate, a looking glass into a reality I could not escape. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened at the construction site. The whole thing had me completely freaked out. As soon as I got home, I poured myself a drink and had to calm down, had to overthink everything that had happened. After what felt like an eternity, I went for the next tape. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get it into the VCR. This one had today's date on it too. But before I could even press play, my doorbell rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. For a second, I just stood there frozen, staring at the door like it might explode. When the bell rang again, I forced myself to walk over and look through the peephole. It was Sam, my best friend since college, showing up completely out of nowhere. He was standing there in his usual work clothes, the cheap blue suit he always wore and his messy brown hair looking like he'd been running his hands through it all day. This was weird. Sam never just dropped by without texting first. I opened the door, trying to act normal even though my heart was racing. "Sam, what are you doing here?" He pushed past me into the apartment, and I could tell something was wrong. His face was all red, and he had that look he gets when he's really worked up about something. "What's going on with you, Alex? You haven't answered any of my calls or texts for days. Jenny said you didn't show up to game night last weekend. Everyone's worried about you." I hadn't even thought about game night. The tapes had taken over my whole life, and I'd completely forgotten about everything else. "I've just been busy," I said, but even I could hear how weak that excuse sounded. "You've been busy? With what?" Sam started pacing around my living room, stepping over empty coffee cups and takeout containers I'd let pile up. Then he saw the TV and the VCR with all the tapes spread out. "What's all this? Are you seriously sitting here watching old videotapes instead of talking to your friends?" I wanted to tell him everything, about the website, the mystery box, the predictions coming true, but how could I? He'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. "It's nothing, just some old stuff I found." "Nothing. Look at yourself, man." Sam gestured at me, and I suddenly realized what he was seeing. My wrinkled clothes, probably hadn't shaved in days, dark circles under my eyes. "You look like hell. Your place is a mess. You're not answering your phone. This isn't nothing." The argument just got worse from there. Sam kept pushing, wanting to know what was really going on. I kept trying to brush it off, getting more defensive with every question. Finally, he exploded. "Fine, stay here with your stupid tapes. When you decide to rejoin the real world, don't bother calling me." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood there for a minute, feeling like garbage. Sam was right. I was falling apart. But he didn't understand. He couldn't understand. Then I remembered the tape. With shaking hands, I pressed play. The static cleared, and I heard my doorbell. Then Sam's voice, crystal clear through the TV speakers. Every word of our argument played out exactly as it had happened, down to the door slam. My stomach turned to ice as I realized this wasn't just a recording. The tape had known Sam would show up before he did. But it didn't stop there. Through the static, I could hear what happened next. Sam getting into his car, the engine starting up. He always played his music too loud, some old rock song blasting through his speakers. Then a car horn, long and urgent. The sound of tires screeching. The horrible crunch of metal hitting metal. And Sam's scream. I ran to my window, looking down at the street, but his car was already gone. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to call Sam. Straight to voicemail. I tried again and again. Each time, that same cheerful message. "Hey, this is Sam. Leave a message." I could still hear the tape playing behind me, and I checked the timestamp on the video. 21:21. My phone said 21:23. The sound of Sam's scream echoed in my head as I paced my apartment, calling him again and again, not wanting to believe this really happened. Each unanswered call made the knot in my stomach tighter. The minutes ticked by like hours. At 21:45, my phone finally rang. But it wasn't Sam. It was Jenny, his girlfriend, her voice broken by sobs. There had been an accident. A truck ran a red light. Sam never had a chance. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. The tape was still playing in the background, that endless static now seeming to mock me. I could have warned him, but would he have believed me? Would it have made any difference? The rest of the night passed in a blur. More calls came in, mutual friends, all with the same question: have you heard about Sam? Each time I had to say yes, had to pretend I was just as shocked as they were. But how could I tell them I'd heard it happen before it happened? That I'd sat here, paralyzed, as my best friend drove to his death. The sun was coming up when I finally turned off the TV. The static had burned itself into my vision, little dots dancing every time I closed my eyes. Sam was dead. The tape had shown me how it would happen, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. That's when I really understood what these tapes were. Not warnings, not chances to change things. Just windows into a future that was already decided. And somewhere in that box was another tape, waiting to show me something else I couldn't change. I looked at the next tape in the box. Tomorrow's date. Part of me wanted to throw the whole thing in the trash, burn it, destroy every last piece of it. But I knew I couldn't. I had to know what was coming next. Even if I couldn't change it, I had to know. Sam was gone, and it was all because of a stupid website, a mystery box, and my need to find something interesting in my boring life. Now things were interesting, all right, but all I wanted was to go back to being bored. The sun kept rising, casting long shadows across my apartment. In a few hours, people would be waking up, going to work, living their normal lives. But my normal was gone. All I had left were these tapes. I woke up the next morning feeling like it was me who had been hit by a truck. My phone was dead, probably from all those calls I made to Sam last night. When I plugged it in, it exploded with notifications. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails. Everyone wanted to know if I was okay, if I'd heard about Sam, if I was coming to the memorial service they were planning. I couldn't deal with any of it. My best friend was dead, and I'd heard it happen before it even happened. How do you process something like that? I called in sick to work. There was no way I could sit at my desk pretending everything was normal. Instead, I sat on my couch, staring at the tape marked with today's date. The VCR hummed quietly, waiting. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I put the tape in. The timestamp showed 8 p.m. Through the static, I could hear familiar sounds. The bell above the door at Mike's corner store, the one right down the block. I'd been going there for years, so I knew exactly what it sounded like. Then shouting, the sound of a scuffle, someone demanding money. A robbery. I looked at my watch. It was only 2 p.m. I had time. Maybe this time I could do something. Maybe I could warn Mike, call the police. Something. The tapes had been right about everything else. Why wouldn't they be right about this? The next few hours were torture. I paced my apartment, watched the clock tick closer to 8 p.m. I kept thinking about Sam, about how I'd failed to save him. I couldn't let that happen again. At 7:30, I walked down to Mike's store. My plan was simple. I'd hang around until the robbery started, then try to stop it. Maybe I could distract the robber, or tackle him, or something. I hadn't really thought it through. I just knew I had to try. The store was quiet when I got there. Mike was behind the counter like always, reading a magazine. A couple of teenagers were looking at snacks in the back. Nothing seemed out of place. At 7:55, my heart started racing. Any minute now. I pretended to look at magazines near the front door, keeping an eye on everyone who came in. Right at 8 p.m., it happened. 2 guys in hoodies burst through the door. One had a gun. Everything moved so fast after that. I tried to do something, I really did. I lunged for the guy with the gun, but he was ready for it. He shoved me hard, and I crashed into a display of chips. While I was down, they grabbed the money from the register and ran. Mike was yelling, the teenagers were screaming, and I just lay there in a pile of crushed Doritos, realizing something horrible. The sounds were exactly the same as on the tape. Even my attempt to stop it had been part of the prediction. The police came, took statements, asked questions. I couldn't tell them I'd known it was going to happen. How could I explain that? They'd think I was involved. When I finally got back to my apartment, I was bruised, covered in chip dust, and completely devastated. I tried to change what the tape showed, and I just ended up being part of it instead. My hands were still shaking as I reached for the last tape in the box. This one was different. Instead of a date, it just said, "The End," in that same neat handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before putting it in the VCR. The static seemed louder this time, more aggressive somehow. Then I heard my own voice coming through the speakers, but it didn't sound right. I was saying things that didn't make sense, random words and phrases that got louder and more frantic. Then, at the end, a gunshot. The screen went black. I sat there in the dark, trying to understand what I'd just heard. The other tapes had all shown exactly what would happen, so this one must be showing my end. But there was no date on this tape, no timestamp, just my voice getting crazier and crazier until, bang. I rewound it and played it again, and again. Each time, trying to make sense of the words I was saying, trying to figure out when this would happen. But it was just nonsense, getting more hysterical each time I spoke, building up to that final gunshot. I played the tape one more time. My voice through the speakers sounded insane, desperate. Who was going to do something like this to me? Was this how it would end? The static from the TV filled my apartment, making everything feel unreal. Sam was dead. I couldn't stop a simple robbery. And somewhere in my future, I was going to be shot. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sam's car crash, heard the robbery, my own voice before that final gunshot. The tapes had shown me many different things, and all had come true exactly as they predicted. This last tape, it wasn't a matter of if anymore, just when. And that was almost worse than knowing the date. Every day could be the day. Every moment could be the moment when the tape's final prediction comes true. I sat in my dark apartment, the static from the TV still playing in the background. The sun would be up soon, bringing another day of pretending to be normal while carrying this impossible knowledge. I couldn't change anything, and somewhere in my future, a gunshot was waiting, all because I got bored and clicked a link I shouldn't have. The static kept playing, and somewhere in it, I thought I could hear whispers. Or maybe I was starting to lose it. The next few days turned into a blur. I stopped going to work completely. What was the point? Every time my phone rang, I jumped. Every noise outside my apartment made me think this was it. My apartment turned into a mess. Empty bottles everywhere, takeout containers piling up in the kitchen. I couldn't remember the last time I'd showered or changed my clothes. The TV stayed on constantly, playing that last tape over and over. Sometimes I'd fall asleep on the couch and wake up to the sound of my own voice, then that gunshot. I tried drinking to make it stop. It didn't help. The whispers and the static just got louder. At first, I thought I was imagining them, but after a while, I could make out what they were saying. My voice, but not exactly my voice, telling me things I didn't want to hear. "It's inevitable," the whispers would say. "You can't change it. You couldn't save Sam. You couldn't stop the robbery. You can't stop this." I rewatched all the previous tapes, looking for something I might have missed. There had to be a pattern, right? Some kind of message hidden in the static. I started writing everything down, covering my walls with notes. Times, dates, every little sound I could hear in the background. The power company called about my bill. I hadn't paid it in weeks. The guy next door knocked on my wall one night, telling me to turn down the TV. I didn't. I couldn't. The static had become like a security blanket. When it was playing, I knew where the whispers were coming from. When it was quiet, they came from everywhere. My landlord tried to check on me once. I pretended I wasn't home. Through the door, I could hear him talking to someone about complaints from the neighbors. Something about strange noises at all hours. The smell. The way I'd been acting. One night, I think it was night, the curtains had been closed for so long I'd lost track. I found myself talking back to the whispers. They made more sense than anything else now. They understood what was happening to me. They knew what it was like to see things you couldn't change, to know things you shouldn't know. I started repeating the phrases from the last tape. They didn't sound like nonsense anymore. They were like a code, a message from my future self. Each time I played the tape, I understood more. Each time, my voice got closer to the voice on the tape. My phone died again. I didn't charge it this time. The whispers told me not to. They said the outside world didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except understanding the message in the tapes. The static started showing me things. Patterns in the snow that looked like faces. Sam's face sometimes, staring at me through the TV. He never said anything, just watched. Was he waiting for me? Was that what the whispers were trying to tell me? I couldn't tell if I was sleeping anymore. Time stopped making sense. The only thing that felt real was the static and the whispers. They were getting louder now, more insistent. My voice and their voice becoming the same voice. The whispers were so loud now, drowning out everything else. I could hear myself talking the same crazy phrases from the tape. It all made sense now. Perfect sense. The static pulsed with my heartbeat. The whispers rose to a scream. I finally understood what looking glass meant. The tapes weren't showing the future. They were showing what always was, what always had to be. We think we're watching time unfold, but time is watching us, recording everything we're going to do before we do it. I took my gun out of my shelf and held it against my temple. In the static, I saw Sam smiling. He understood too. He was waiting for me. The gunshot was exactly as loud as it had been on the tape. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you want more tales like this, hit like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.